Muchas gracias por acompañarnos en esta entrevista. Están con nosotros esta tarde la profesora Meredith Kolsky Lewis, el profesor John Ravenhill y el profesor Thomas Bollyky, quienes nos acompañan en el marco del seminario que organiza el Centro de Estudios Internacionales, que organizó el día de hoy, sobre el TLC, el TLCAN y las nuevas iniciativas comerciales regionales, en particular el TPP y el TTIP. Voy a hacer una pregunta, dos de hecho, a cada uno de ellos, y voy a hablar en inglés, que es el idioma natal de ellos. Beginning with, thank you Meredith for this interview, very short one. If I could ask, why do you consider the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the TPP, a possible new trade or new trading paradigm, and what would be the likely implications of this agreement?
Well, I think there are at least 4 ways in which the TPP is different from most other free trade agreements. First is the number of parties. There are 12 countries currently negotiating this agreement. Second is that in the past, when there have been more than 2 countries in a free trade agreement, the agreement has just been regional neighbors, such as NAFTA. But for the TPP, not all the countries are very near each other at all. We have countries from South America and Oceania and Southeast Asia and Northeast Asia. Third is the size of the economies involved. Prior to the TPP, we had a number of FTAs featuring one large country, such as the US or Japan, and then a smaller economy. But in the TPP, we have, for the first time, 2 very large countries in a free trade agreement together, that being the US and Japan. And then lastly, the scope of the agreement is very ambitious. It has new agenda items that are not features of other FTAs, such as regulatory coherence, state-owned enterprises, and the like. And in addition, it will be very comprehensive in terms of coverage without the usual exclusions for sensitive products, such as agricultural products or textiles. I think the implications of this are, first of all, that this may lead to a paradigm shift, and in fact, we are seeing that to a degree with the beginning of the TTIP negotiations, which now links to other big economies in a trade agreement, the RCEP negotiation, which features 16 countries, and the TTIP is also following an ambitious agenda of topics. In addition, the TPP has the potential to expand into an even larger agreement. There are many countries lined up wanting to join, and this will have implications both for other regions of the world and also for dynamics with the World Trade Organization. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Meredith. For John, how are the TPP and the RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, likely to affect economic integration in Asia?
Well, my short answer to that question is that I don't think they will make a huge amount of difference. Okay. Now, that may come as a surprise given the amount of attention that is given to trade agreements and their negotiation. But the level of economic integration in Asia is already equivalent to that in North America, if one takes the conventional measure, that is the share of total trade of these countries that is conducted with their regional partners. And this integration has occurred in the absence of any region-wide trade agreement. So that already there's a very substantial flow of trade amongst the countries of the region, especially in components. A flow that takes place without really any substantial impediments being in place. A second reason then is that trade barriers are low, and they're really not the major factor in economic relations within the region. Exchange rates, size of markets, wage rates. These are all things which are fostering changes in economic integration in the region, and these are not likely to be affected by either of these regional agreements. If China, for instance, isn't part of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and I think the seminar that we had today, almost everyone agreed that this was unlikely to take place in the foreseeable future. Will this really make a difference to China's attractiveness to foreign investors? Will there be a major change in the orientation of production networks away from China because it's not in the TPP? Frankly, I don't think that that will be the case. Finally, if one's looking at the TPP, a number of the major economies in the region are not members of it. China is the obvious example, but it's also the case for South Korea and for Taiwan. So at the moment, with the notable exception of Japan, as Meredith has pointed out, the other Asian economies that are participating in the TPP are very small.
Okay. Very interesting, because there is indeed a lot of excitement and talk about how this is going to change the world, maybe not. For Thomas, what kind of trade agreement is the TPP and the TTIP, and how are they likely to affect, not the TPP, I'm sorry, the TTIP, and how is it likely to affect transatlantic trade? What kind of agreement is this one? Similar or not to TPP?
It is similar. It's a regional trade agreement. It's the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. In fact, if concluded, it will be the largest regional trade agreement concluded. It's between the U.S. and the European Union. Between those two economies, they represent nearly half of the world's GDP, a third of the world's trade in goods and services, and $3.6 trillion in bilateral investment. As to whether or not they will change transatlantic commerce, that depends on how successful they are in addressing regulatory barriers. Meredith mentioned in the TPP talks, there's been a move to looking at regulatory coherence has really gained momentum in these talks. And the reason for that are tariff barriers. Currently, what most trade agreements have addressed in the past are very low between Europe and the United States. The average tariff in the U.S. As applies to Europe would be 3%. It's 5% in the European context. Estimates have said that 80% of the economic benefits of this agreement will come from reducing the unnecessary duplication or divergence of regulatory barriers between these two economies. There's lots of reasons to be pessimistic about that. This is not the first time the European Union and the U.S. have tried to negotiate on regulations. There have been about, depending on how you count them, 8 to 10 attempts just in the last 20 years. These are sensitive issues or really entrenched regulatory approaches and cultural values. But I think there's been a change in the global economy that might make progress possible. And that's the growth of global supply chains with lower transportation costs, improved information communication technology, lower tariffs. You've seen these global value chains where there's unbundled and outsourced goods and services in multiple markets and to different service providers. This now represents the bulk of international trade. 56% of the trade in goods is now in components, and 73% of the trade in services is now in inputs. That's the bulk of international trade. In this environment, there's a real importance for the interests of regulation and trade are overlapping, and I think you're starting to see the acknowledgement of that between U.S. and European, both trade officials and regulatory officials, and I think we're seeing some good, positive early signs.
Okay, you just answered the very last question, 1 minute answer. Whether it's likely or unlikely that the TTIP will be signed in the next 2-3 years short term?
Very short answer, next 2 years? I don't think so. I think it will happen after the 2016 U.S. election, if I had to predict. So 2016, 2017 is when I think you're more likely to see a U.S.-European agreement.
Okay. How about the TPP? You think it will be signed in a relatively short period of time? Say 2 years?
Ooh, now 2 years is a long time in politics, yes.
Okay, so
I would
1
say
year?
that would be medium term. I don't think the TPP will be signed in the next 6 months. I think there are still a lot of very significant issues that have to be overcome. Market access issues, agricultural products to Japan, agricultural products to the United States, to Canada, intellectual property issues. These are all very significant issues that still have to be resolved. But I think one of the other key factors is whether or not the US administration is able to secure a trade promotion authority, and that doesn't seem likely before the congressional elections of this year.
All right. Did you think the same, Meredith?
I agree. I was just in New Zealand, and prior to Harry Reid's statement about not putting Trade Promotion Authority up for discussion, the indications I had there were that the agreement was essentially done and that it would be signed in the first half of this year. But I think that Reid's statement about Trade Promotion Authority takes all of that off the table, and I think John is right, it is more likely to happen after the next elections. But I would think it would happen within the next 2 years if it's going to happen.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for participating in this interview.